So this is just a reminder that we record these videos. We also close caption them so that you can get the transcript of it if you want to. I do post these recordings up onto my YouTube channel. Amber in the training department has the links for those and should be distributing those to your coordinators as needed. So I'm going to take a break from admitting folks and go ahead and start the training. And I will, every week I try to get this right, with the videos and the sharing. So hopefully I have done that and that you can see the BHRS main screen that I use for the title page. Okay, just a reminder for those of you who are new to the trainings, cameras are to be turned on the entire time. Be mindful of movement, so try not to twirl in your chair. Cameras need to be facing you and not the ceiling, desk, or floor. Mute yourself if you're not speaking, and remember that the chat is visible to everybody and is captured on the recordings. Please, no driving, vaping, or smoking while in the Zoom training. Feel free to pull over by your nearest Starbucks or favorite community-based internet access you can have if you need to. And I do not mind if you eat or drink during this video. Okay, one more admit and then we'll get going. Okay, so today's training is about reviewing a model for de-escalating agitated clients or community members, even if you're just out in the community shopping and perhaps get involved in a bystander situation. We're also going to learn a model for crisis intervention. So this is not the crisis intervention for 5150s or hospitalization. This is a general model of crisis intervention for use in the community, whether you are involved in a disaster situation or a person has experienced tragic loss or an immediate loss. This is a way that you can work with individuals to help initially stabilize them and help them move forward. So to review, de-escalation is use of your clinical awareness and skills to help calm a person in distress. Crisis intervention is a clinical model used to assist clients or individuals in crisis. And there are a lot of these types of crisis intervention models, and I have a mashup that I've developed over the years of having to respond to natural disasters and personal crises. So for de-escalation techniques, I'll start in this first orange quadrant here. Sometimes we see clients in distress and we need to de-escalate them for their safety and ours. Folks can become agitated for a number of reasons. There can be intoxication involved, psychosis involved, somebody just at the end of their rope and are very frustrated with their inability to access services or resources. I know I've become very agitated in some situations when I'm not able to access the resources that I need. Or I'm in a customer service situation where I'm having to punch through all our different telephone call center menus where you're on your third menu and you still haven't been able to talk to somebody or get your situation addressed. So people can become agitated in all kinds of situations. And the first thing to remember when we're responding to a person who is agitated is we've got to calm ourselves down pretty quickly because we don't want to escalate the other person. I'm sure we've all been in situations where we've seen somebody who was already agitated become more escalated because the person dealing with them just was not in their own good space of being able to calm the person down. So what I always do is I just take a deep breath and I try to recall my de-escalation steps that we'll go over in a minute. Particularly when working at BHRS with clients who are escalated, it's really important to obtain assistance as soon as possible and follow BHRS procedures when confronted by an escalated client. Sometimes this means having to call security. Sometimes it means having to use your cell phone, even if the person's still escalated. Hey, I'm gonna address you in just a second. I gotta make a really quick call or a really quick text to get some assistance for yourself because your safety is number one. Yes, we want to de-escalate clients and make sure our surroundings are safe, but your safety is number one if you're in front of a person who is agitated. And the fourth thing to remember is to know your limits and triggers. I think it's really important for us to remember what triggers us. And what I'd like you to do is put in the chat, what are some of the limits and triggers when you're working around somebody who is agitated or who might be yelling? I think it's important for us to be mindful of that and know what your triggers are. So take a minute to think about if you're in front of somebody who's really agitated, what are some of the things that triggers you or what happens? Um, does yelling trigger you? Do you find your heart rate going up? Do you find yourself getting shaky? Males yelling creates more tension for me is one response in the chat. Think about what are some of your triggers because we're going to have to figure out how to address those in order for you to be effective in working with somebody who's agitated. Some folks have indicated that having insults thrown at you or condescending comments, no proper exit strategy. Sometimes we get triggered when people make sexist, racial, ethnic um, comments or thrown at us, insults thrown at us, or commenting on features of our body, excess profanity, demanding and entitlement behaviors, right? These are some of the things that trigger us. And as you're thinking that through, what are some of racism? Absolutely. What are some of the things you do to calm yourself when you're in that kind of situation? Do you have an internal mantra that you say to yourself? Do you have something physiological that you do? Jessica added belittling statements when somebody makes a statement that is belittling is a trigger. What are some of the things you do to calm? For me, it's long exhale breathing. When we inhale, our heart rate slightly goes up. When we exhale, our heart rate slightly goes down. So when I engage in the self breathing, it's easier for me to be able to manage. Some folks plan an exit strategy to help them calm down. Breathing and positive self talk help. Deep, deep breath with a quick silent prayer works. Silence, walking away to your safe space or finding alone space, stepping away and letting somebody else take over. Sometimes you have to tag team, zoning out for a second and asking questions towards a client to de-escalate the environment. These are really good tips for how to manage our own. It's not just our thoughts, it's our physiology we have to manage. So if you have additional thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat as I go back to the PowerPoint and look at de-escalation steps. So there are three main things that you have to do to de-escalate someone. First thing is you have to build rapport and you have to build it very quickly. The second thing is get assistance, and sometimes you have to do this at the same time that you're working to de-escalate someone. And the third thing to remember is your safety is first. Always remember your safety is first. Um, we want everybody to maintain safety, um, and we don't want you injured. Long time ago, one of my first jobs out of high school was as a bank teller. And even when we processed how to manage a bank robbery, the bank is like, your safety is first. We cannot replace you. We don't want you injured. We don't want you hurt. So same thing in mental health. Your safety is first. So these are the steps to help de-escalate a client. The first is active listening. We talked about active listening a couple of weeks ago. What are some of the things you do in active listening? Think about those skills that you've acquired for active listening. The second is to ask open-ended questions, the who, what, when, where, and how questions. I ask you to eliminate why questions, particularly in de-escalation, because why questions can agitate people or make them feel defensive. Use simple language. Do not use jargon. Do not use a ton of mental health terms and phrases. Ask somebody, that's a closed-ended question. What can I do to help you feel better? What can I do to help you um, improve the moment? What can I do? How can we help the situation? Or how can we move forward here? So just simple language using the who, what, when, where, and how questions. Reflect the person's concern. Ask them what's wrong, what's bothering you right now. And they might say anything from, I just had a huge argument with my girlfriend, to that man standing next to you is telling me to hurt you, if they're psychotic or delusional. So it can be all kinds of things, but say, I understand you, or I hear you when you say there's a person yelling at you. And you have to be honest. I don't see that person, but I absolutely believe that you are experiencing this person yelling at you. So you don't want to, you want to reality test. You want to be honest with reality testing, but you don't want to further agitate the person by saying you don't see it, or what have you. So explain then what you can do, and these have to be reasonable options. I watched I screened a lot of videos for this training today, and I saw a police training video where the police officer said, look, I've got two options for you. I can get somebody to come here to talk to you, like his mobile crisis team, or I can take you somewhere else to talk to somebody that can help you, but I can't leave you here by yourself. So give somebody reasonable options, and sometimes a reasonable option does not include walking away or leaving the person alone. And then the final thing is to look for behavioral de-escalation. So is the person's flushed face starting to come back to a more natural color? Are they unclenching their fists? Are they taking a breath and relaxing their shoulders? Are they sitting down? So look for that behavioral de-escalation. So I'm going to try one more time to run a video, but first I want to talk a little bit about body language. So we talked a little bit about nonverbal body language a couple of weeks ago, but there's some really specific to de-escalation I want you to be aware of. So for you, you need to stand more than an arm's distance away. Some people stand 2 arms distances away. And we need to be aware of cultural issues around proximity. So there's different levels of proximity in terms of how close you normally would stand away from a person to have a conversation if you were a family member versus if you don't know the person. Some cultures have proximity issues regarding, is it two males talking, two females, or a male and a female? They might have different distance. So try to be culturally mindful of proximity distance. And I definitely want you to be at least an arm's distance away from somebody, and preferably 2 arms distances away, which for me would probably be about 5 feet away. Some people it might be a little less, but stand 4 to 5 feet away from the person. So number one, they can't swing at you, and number two, they can't charge you easily. It's important to make no sudden moves or to point at the client or to yell at the client. Again, I watched a lot of law enforcement videos, and they had a really good video of what not to do. So the police officer was yelling at the person to get down on the ground, and he was pointing at them. And then he made the move that always makes my blood run cold, which is he put his hand on his gun. And so given my social location, for that to make me triggered, think about other people and other races and ethnicities and cultures that would be very triggered by that and would escalate or try to run away when they see somebody doing that. The other thing is to take a non-dominant posture. So you don't want to be leaning forward. You don't want to be pointing. You want to be standing on the back of your heels. You want to be relaxed, have your arms at your side, your hands in front of your body. A lot of time people will have their hands out like this, or they'll have their hands like this. I tend to talk a little bit with my hands, so my hands are going to be moving in front of my body. Some things to understand about the client's body language. So especially if somebody's sitting, hands on their knees and leaning forward means they want to conclude the conversation, get up and move. So if you see somebody move to lean forward and put their hands on their knees, it means they're going to get up in a minute. And you want to let them have clear access to getting out of your office or out of the space that you're in. You don't ever want to get in the way of somebody who's agitated and wants to escape the situation. If someone turns their feet or their body away from you, it means they dislike the interaction, or they're going to ignore you. So it's obvious when somebody's body's turning away. And we talk about this in supervision sometimes when engaging with clients, but also walk and see if they're turning their feet away from you. Their feet are going to be pointed in the direction they want to go. So again, be mindful of that and get out of their way. It is not your job to put your hands on somebody. It is not your job to physically detain somebody. And then a sudden increase in foot or leg movement indicates discomfort or distress. Now, I know a lot of people with ADHD, they jiggle their knee a lot. I have a spouse with ADHD and she's always jiggling that knee, but this is more agitated or more kind of jerky movements. They're fidgety movements. They're agitated or distressed when they experience that. So I would really, these are not kind of the typical nonverbal communication that we talk about. So I would certainly print out this page and keep it around you as you're working with clients and trying to remember some of these things. So I'm going to go to the video. I'm hopeful. I changed my settings again. I am going to drop the video in the chat as well. So I'm going to start the video and let me see who's here that I know. Brianna, would you tell me if you can hear the audio on this?
No.
Okay. So I still haven't figured out how to set this up. I really do change my settings every week and look it up. What I'd like you to do is on your own, watch this video. It's a 10-minute video about de-escalating in a hospital setting. And what I want you to do is I want you to specifically watch the doctor's posture, and I want you to notice what he did to de-escalate the client. So please take 10 minutes to watch that recording on your own. Most folks are starting to wrap up the video. While you're doing that and adjusting back to the large group, what skills did the psychiatrist use to de-escalate the client? You can share with your voice or put that in the chat.
I think one of the things I liked was giving the person or your client or so choices, to giving them options. I understand a lot of us don't, probably work at the psych hospital, but, just giving them a choice almost gives them like a sense of empowerment, maybe,
Yeah.
you know. So I think that that was a good thing.
Yeah, giving simple options. Do you want to sit or do you want to stand? Would you like something to eat or something to drink? Would you like a coffee or a Coke? Those kinds of short phrases, as Christina said, no jargon, the body language, the choices. He didn't seem threatening to me. That again has a lot of culture attached to it. Body language was more relaxing. Keeping a calm tone, I think, is a good idea, whatever that means for you, and not becoming escalated yourself, I think is really important. Very good. Very good. So, as folks are coming back to the video, let's go to the next slide. We're going to have a small group discussion. I'm going to break you into groups of about 4 to 5 persons each. And I want you to think of a time you encountered somebody who was agitated and share that with the group. Which of these techniques did you use or could you have used? And if you didn't, excuse me, if you have never worked with somebody who is agitated, think of observing an interaction between somebody who is agitated and somebody who is trying to calm them down. Could be, doesn't even have to be a clinical example, can be a community example or family example. And by the way, the last thing to say to somebody who's agitated is, you need to calm down, because that just escalates people even more. So think of a time you encountered someone who is agitated or observed that. Which of the techniques did you use or could you have used? What triggers might you experience and how can you manage them? And so decide from your group who will report back to the larger group. Give us a brief description of the incident, skills used or should have used, and what the outcome was, and how to manage triggers. And I will need to stop sharing for a minute to get back to my, let's see, we have, okay. And please, when you get the invitation, please accept the invitation to your breakout rooms. And please remember which breakout room you were in. Thank you. Okay. As folks are coming back to the main room, give yourself a minute and whoever is going to report out, just need a brief description of the incident, skills, just one or two skills used, and what was the outcome, and how did the person working with the escalated individual manage their own triggers. And it's okay if you didn't get through all of these, just report out what you have. So which group would like to go first?
I'll go first. Get it
Okay,
over
what
with.
group?
I'm group
Thank you.
6.
Okay, thanks.
And the tactics were between four different types of interventions. One was with a parent, one was with a child, one was with another parent. So those were how our incidents were going. A lot of them, they were yelling, maybe kind of just very loud and hard to kind of de-escalate. So some of the tactics we kind of mainly focused on is implementing validating feelings, making sure that they're able to express it and feel like they're heard. Um, then the other one was providing them space. In one situation, someone even changed the setting and had everyone else leave. That was a child setting. Um, what else? Uh, Taking turns. So this situation was where there were multiple staff, so they just took turns. They used different genders as support, behavior modification, utilizing support systems. So they had a parent come in to kind of support the kid through the transition, repeating validation, describing limits. I'm not able to do this, kind of thing, so they're aware of it. And those were about it.
That's excellent, excellent. I really liked validating feelings and providing physical space, are great ideas, and tag teaming with other professionals or paraprofessionals in your environment, or maybe even a family member if you're working out in the community. So those are
They
great
did that.
ideas.
The client had schizophrenia, so that client had a part of the treatment plan was behavior modification, so that's what taking turns with the staff to kind of decrease the behavior because the client was kicked out of a lot of programs, so they didn't want it
Mhm.
just to keep happening. So that's how they try to manage the crisis.
Excellent, excellent. Wonderful report out. Thank you so much. Who's
No problem.
next?
I can go next. I was
Mhm.
in group 2. So personal experience, I had a client who was a high school student, and a time that they were like agitated, I had allowed them to like pace back and forth, and luckily my office space was like a big classroom, so there's a good enough distance between us. And so as they're just kind of like saying their thoughts out loud and just kind of going on. I validated them, kind of like paraphrased some of the things they said, and just kind of gave them that room to calm themselves down. Um, and eventually they were able to like, you know, come back down. And I just used like a soothing and calm voice. So yeah.
Great, great. Again, validation is key here, as well as I like the idea of providing the environment so the person can calm themselves or soothe themselves. I think is a really good outcome. Thank you. Who's next?
I can go.
Thank you.
Group 4. We didn't have too many examples, but the one that I shared was just about. I mean, my kiddos aren't in locked facilities or in a place where they can't get away, but I've definitely had kiddos that like turn their back on me. Their body language, you can tell they don't want to be in the sessions. And then, kiddos just straight up say they don't want to have sessions anymore, but they're clearly bothered. So, like just like everyone else keeps saying, is the validation. So, doing the empathy, the empathetic listening, and mirroring and letting them know they did hear them, and if you can relate or you have a way to relate, and like sometimes I share small portions so they know that I know that feeling that they have. And I know not every clinician will share specifics about themselves, but in certain situations, I feel comfortable doing it. And so in that situation, I did, and it really helped the client. You could see it in her eyes. She just like kind of relaxed a little bit, and then felt like you could tell the urge to leave what just was dissipating in her eyes. It just
Good.
kind of was going down. So just kind of getting more on her level and letting her know too, like in my situation, they can leave. So it's like, hey, I see that you're doing, your body's doing this, and I can tell you don't want to be here. You can go,
Yeah.
type thing. And then one of the other people in my group said something about the triggers, that kiddos might be acting out and smacking their head against the wall, and they just try to be there with like a pillow or some kind of support so they don't further hurt the kiddo in the event they get triggered.
Mhm.
So if they can't control their, they're doing with their body and just smacking
Right.
themselves, hurting themselves, they just try to like make sure no further harm goes
Mhm.
in, for the triggers. But that's it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So again, validation is really important, and being empathic with somebody, just really settling yourself and trying to be in their shoes for a few minutes can be really helpful. And you also mentioned noticing the behavioral change, the nonverbal behavior change in that client when you noticed that she was relaxing a little bit. So that's a really good skill to do as well. Thank you. Who's next?
I'll
I
go
can go
for
next.
one.
Oh,
So go ahead, Ash. Pardon.
sorry. I believe that we were group number 3.
Okay.
I'm not really sure. I should have written that down.
Okay.
Sorry. So we all had different experiences we talked about, but something that was really common is we emphasize the importance of allowing the client to have space, either physically taking the client to a different room or taking them outside to calm down, and allowing them space to not talk about what's going on with them if they don't feel comfortable, but also allowing them to have space if they want to talk about it. I don't remember everyone's specific situations, I'm sorry, but the one I spoke about was when I was shadowing an assessment and a client was getting triggered hearing about her trauma again during the assessment. And as I was the person shadowing, I took her outside and, I told her we can either stand here in silence, and you can calm down on your own, or you can talk to me and we can work through it. And eventually in the next couple minutes, she talked to me, and then through that, we talked about how she's coped with it before and talked about her drawing and how that has helped her.
Excellent. Excellent. Very good skills. And we can offer things. Sometimes you have a client who might be just sobbing uncontrollably and is not able to kind of pull it back, and offer tissues, offer a glass of water, offer a safe place to sit. Some of you might have stuffed animals in your office, or a blanket or a pillow. Um, if somebody has transported themselves to the office, I ask them, are you going to wait in the waiting room of your car until you're able to be able to be safe? So these are also important ways to be empathic too. Thank you, Ash. Deetra?
Hi, for group 1. We had a lot of good examples and some great experience too. I liked Malia, who was a probation officer and had a client who was acting out in the lobby. Observation, she used observation skills, and she knew that he was unhoused, right? And that he was hungry. And then observing him, she noticed him eating cigarettes, right? And so she was able to respond by giving him food, by meeting the need, because she was able to at that time. And the result was the client checking in every other day, right? Because the rapport was built. But empathy was a big one in this. I like that one. I had a challenging one. It was early in my career. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but you can tell me. So I was a legal advocate for victim witness and sexual assault. I was in a family mediation, and something happened where the mediator recommended the mother has full custody. Dad was the offender. I go to the parking lot of the court. He's approaching me, right? He's very aggressive approaching me, and there's a language barrier. You take my kids, and you take my kids, and he's irate, and nobody was around, of course, all of a sudden. And so I did the calm voice. I tried to do the active listening, but I was in a situation to where the only option was a reevaluation in 6 months, right? So in this situation, for safety reasons and fear, I had to tell a fib, which it was either say that or say, I told him, I said, well, let's go back inside. We're going to go get your kids right now. Let's go get your kids right now, which was dangerous because I couldn't produce that. But
Right.
then I would have been in, around officers, so I'd have been safe. But that was a situation where even to this day, I don't know if I had any other option at that time. I don't know, Valerie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you get into legal and ethical issues, but ethically, you had, so your safety is number one, right?
Right.
So you do what you have to do to maintain your safety, even if that includes telling untruths, so that you can get yourself back in a safe situation. I hope nobody said that was the wrong answer, because I think that that's a very reasonable answer. That's almost like a hostage situation, where you try to make a connection. And that's a different training that I don't do, but it's more like you're being held hostage and you're in fear for your life sometimes. So yeah, say what you need to say to get back around somebody else, that can help provide your safety and can assist you in de-escalating the client.
Thank you. He began walking with me, but then he
Good.
ventured off.
Okay.
So I was able to say,
Okay.
hey, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. That also brings up another idea of getting somebody to walk with you, and you are walking towards where you need to be safe, right? So that's another technique to use if the person won't de-escalate. Okay. Thank you, Dietrich. Really good examples. Empathy is huge. So who was in group 5?
That was my group.
Okay.
I don't remember everything that was said, but I think, like most people said, empathy was something we all kind of mentioned briefly, like trying to understand where that person is coming from. One of the examples I was given in group was they have like video games that are like live where you can't pause them, and validating like when they get interrupted, like, I know that sucks kind of a deal. So understanding where that they're coming from in that sense.
Mhm.
Active listening was another thing we kind of talked about. With one of my clients, he was very upset regarding his assessment done by another clinician, and he was really upset. So just letting him vent about it, letting him get it all out, and just listening to what he has to say, and just letting him vent, and just letting him know I'm hearing you, basically, um, was what I did, and just like giving them options as well. And like there was a situation for me that, like, kind of like Deetra mentioned, I mean, I was positive I did the right thing, but there was no way of de-escalating the situation. So one of the clients decided to expose himself, and instead of trying to de-escalate that, I left. I wasn't going to try to de-escalate that. So we also kind of discussed that, like, what point are we done trying to de-escalate, for our own safety?
Mhm. Mhm. That is an excellent question. Everybody has what we perceive as our own safety levels. And these are conversations to have within your units as well, because each unit is different. Some of you are in an office all day where clients come to you, and some of you are out in the field. I know Fatima is at the jail. Other people work in different settings. Sometimes you're in homeless camps, sometimes you're in people's homes. And you've got to have a combination of your own personal safety level versus what's a reasonable expectation of safety in this profession in these different settings. So these are excellent conversations to have in group supervision if you have access to a group, in your seminars if you're an intern, and within your units with your coordinators and your task supervisors and your field instructors. Because I know when I first started doing social work, well, like I said, I was a bank teller through college. I'd been working in a bank, and now I'm doing home visits and high-rise projects in Baltimore. It's like, where's my set point for safety? And what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my organization? So those are a lot of conversations I had at the beginning of my social work career. So these are really important to have. So thank you for bringing that up, Fatima, and Deetra as well. Somebody put in the chat, I actually heard that offering tissues can make clients feel like their crying is making other people in the room uncomfortable. I tend not to offer tissues unless they ask. I hadn't heard that before. I buy tissues by the case when I'm in clinical work, and I have tissues within reach of everybody, so I don't have to physically offer them. So that, again, depends on your setting. If you're working in the field, I carry the little miniature packs of tissues, and I hand those out to folks when they're sniffling from allergies as well as when they're crying from clinical issues.
I
So
heard
thank
that's the
you.
correct way. You're not
Pardon
supposed to
me?
yeah, Valerie, I heard that's the correct way. You're not supposed to offer the tissues, you're just supposed to have them accessible because the act of offering the tissue is the misinterpretation of to stop the tears, is what
Okay.
some people may say.
Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you for adding that. For those of you who did that, I appreciate it. So we're going to take a deep breath. These were really, really good shares. I'm going to start sharing my screen because we're going to pivot to crisis intervention. So it's good to start with de-escalation because sometimes you will work with folks who are agitated in the middle of a crisis. So remember these de-escalation techniques as well. So I'm sharing the screen now. And what I'd like you to do, those of you who have your ID badges available, maybe out on your desk or on a lanyard, take a look at the back of your ID badge. And what does it say? It says something along the lines of, in case of a natural disaster, the county can call on you to work in that setting. I I didn't look at the back of my ID badge for the first couple of weeks. I worked for BHRS, went to the sheriff's office, got my picture taken. I was more concerned that I was growing out my gray hair and didn't like the way it looked, and the lighting's terrible, and I look like I'm sick. And a couple of weeks later, I was fiddling with my badge and looked in the back and said, "Oh my goodness, look at what else I'm expected to do." And at the time, the county wasn't offering a lot of trainings around disaster management or crisis intervention in disasters. So I thought it was really important to at least go over a model for doing this so that you have this kind of information. Um, I must have been thinking about fires a lot because I have a lot of fire examples in here. My whole family lives in Florida and the Carolinas, and so it's been an exciting 2 weeks. Fortunately for my family, they don't have a lot of damage to their property and nobody was injured. But my goodness, you can look at those communities that are flooded out. Some of those communities are gone in Western North Carolina. And they're pulling disaster management and crisis intervention people from all over the country to work in those communities. So, sometimes your community is going to experience a catastrophic event or a mass casualty event. In California, in the Central Valley, it's not likely to be an earthquake, but if there's an earthquake in the Bay Area, they're going to evacuate folks into the Central Valley, and Central Valley folks are going to be called on to work in the Bay Area. We're all at risk of the large wildfires we have now. Parts of the Central Valley are at risk of flooding and have flooded in the past. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of mass shootings in our communities, and so there's mass casualty events. You can also use these skills when you're working with a client who has experienced a more personal catastrophe. So maybe they've lost a loved one, or they themselves have a recent terminal diagnosis, or there's a sudden death in the family, or they've witnessed one in the community, a violent death in the community. Can even be working with somebody who's lost their home due to fire or flooding, or some other event. Even losing custody of your kids could be catastrophic for some people and might need some information about how to manage a crisis. So, crisis intervention is really about how do you stabilize the person right now and help them plan for the next 24 to 48 hours. So I'm sorry for the small print on this slide, but I couldn't figure out how to get it all in. So the first thing is to ensure safety. So you need to ensure the safety of everybody involved, and look at basic needs. So food, shelter, clothing, access to clean water, etc. This also includes assessing safety for health status and mental health status. What are their immediate physical needs? Do they need medication or access to emergency medications? Who in their community can help them? Where can they go to access food, clean water, clothing, shelter, medications? How can they get access to communications? I know in Western North Carolina, even in Florida this week, for instance, one of my family members who lived in an area that wasn't that badly affected still doesn't have power almost a week later. Where do you go to charge your phone? How do you find out if your relatives are okay? I've seen some of my friends and family posting on Facebook, hey, I'm staying at this location and I'm okay. But if you don't have access to power, you don't get access to the social media or your communication systems. The second thing is to provide support. Again, validation and empathy, acknowledge the crisis event and that person's reaction to it. So it's active listening, it's empathy, validating feelings, and not making judgments about the emotional impact on the individual. I remember early in my career, somebody came to me completely dysregulated and sobbing. And at the time, I struggled to generate empathy around their situation because to me, it didn't seem like that bad. So that was a situation where I was like, well, it's not my life. It's not my circumstance. So I've got to suspend that judgment that I was feeling around that person's crisis and focus on stabilization and planning for 24 to 48 hours. The third step is facilitating understanding, helping the client understand and normalize their reactions. And this is when I start talking about symptoms of acute stress or PTSD. You're going to forget where you left your keys. You're going to forget, well, like who remembers anybody's phone number anymore? You're going to forget where you put your pills. You're going to forget. So memory is a big problem. Disorganization is a big problem because our brains are trying to process the catastrophic event. So we kind of lose track of the everyday things. And I help people recognize that this is a normal response. So just normalize the response and encourage expression of emotion. Validate their feelings, let people vent, listen to them in an active listening way so that you can validate what they're saying and what they're experiencing and be able to provide some reassurance to them. The fourth step is to encourage effective coping. So here's where you can pull out all the coping skills that you've got in your bag. I always ask what has been working for you right now, today in terms of coping. I ask what has worked for you in the past. Is that something you can do now? When the person describes what they don't want to do, which is what a lot of people default is, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to go to this place. I ask people, what can you do instead? I try to flip the conversation to help them in a strengths and solution focused manner to be able to get to what they need to in terms of coping. So you can also discuss physical aspects that some people are not comfortable talking about this in therapy because we're not medical personnel, but I think it's valid to talk about self-care in terms of diet. What can you eat? What can you drink? Where are you going to sleep? What resources do you have? And help them with any stress reduction or stress management or mindfulness techniques that you can in the moment. So once you've started processing that, you're validating that, you're acknowledging feelings, you're talking about coping mechanisms and resources, then this is when you can make a clear plan. And I used to keep index cards and write things down for people. I now ask them to type it onto their phone, or I'll use my work phone to type it into my notes, and then I'll text it to them so that they have a copy of it. Develop a clear plan of action. What do they need to do in the next 24 to 48 hours? And what are the alternatives? If this plan doesn't work, what is your alternative? For instance, my niece has kidney failure and is on dialysis. Her dialysis clinic has flooded. So you can't go to your regular clinic. Who's your contact person for that company? You don't have power to charge your phone. Let's charge your phone while we're in the office. I know a lot of relief workers carry the charged up batteries. They'll carry 2 or 3 of those at a time so that they can charge people's phones while they're talking to them. So if that doesn't work out, where are you going to go? So my niece said, well, I'm going to go to the emergency room. She went to the emergency room. They said, we can't see you today. We have to see you tomorrow. And she's like, I haven't had dialysis in 5 days. I'm going to stay here until I get dialysis. I mean, sometimes you just have to be assertive like that, and you have to coach people into assertiveness to get their needs met. Assertiveness without being aggressive, without being nasty, without having a blow up. So plans are not going to work. Got to have an alternative. You got to have a plan B, sometimes a plan C, D, and E. Recovery and referral. So what does this person need in terms of follow-up? We're going to primarily be called to work on with folks who are already in the BHRS system. Do they have a plan for taking care of their mental health issues? Do they have a plan for getting access to their medications? If our med clinic is disrupted for some reason, how are they going to get medications? How can I call my coordinator, my manager, to then figure out for this person how they're going to get access to the needs that they have? And then obtain commitment. Say, hey, this is our plan. This is step 1, step 2, step 3. Is this something you can do? And ask them, how are they going to do it? It's like the question I ask at the end of all my trainings. What is the one thing you're going to do this week, right? Getting commitment from somebody increases the likelihood that they'll be able to do that thing. So obtain commitment. If the person doesn't read, ask them if they want a written or verbal list of things to do. Record it on their phone if they want verbal. Give them both if they want both. Those are the steps to do. So I have a role play. I don't think we're going to have enough time for the role play, but what I am going to break you into small groups. And I want you to review one of the role play scenarios that I've got. So instead of role playing it, I want you to discuss a role play scenario and think about these steps that we just talked about. What are the steps that you would go through with this person, and what are some of the barriers that you might encounter helping this person? So here are the role play scenarios, and these are both real role plays. Consumer watched a fire move closer to their home for 24 hours, so there's a lot of anticipatory anxiety and distress. They spent 2 days at the local shelter without knowing what happened in their community. After 2 days, they learned that their rental home is a total loss. So they don't have access to homeowners insurance. They might not have immediate access to county or federal funds for relief. They have their dog with them, and they have a small suitcase of clothes, and they have a week's worth of medications. They don't necessarily have access to food or water, but they still are at a shelter. So that's role play number 1. The second role play actually happened a month ago at a BHRS housing unit. And it's a little more graphic in terms of death, injury, and death, if you want to do that role play. So I'd say all of mental health is a trigger warning, but this isn't a special trigger warning. So consumer attempted to rescue a friend from a fire in a motel room. They became physically sick. They were able to pull the individual out, but they were physically sick after seeing the burns on 90% of the individual's body. They reported feelings to you because BHRS said all hands on deck. Anybody who's free went to the motel. The client reported feelings ranging from being glad they were able to help their friend to horror at the amount of burns their friend suffered. So this is an exposure to a very significant trauma. While in the interview with you, the police came by to gather information, and they tell the consumer that their friend has died. So that's a different kind of crisis situation. So again, I'm going to put you into small groups for about 10 minutes. I just want you to chat through either one of these situations and compare it to these 8 steps for crisis intervention. What are some of the questions you would ask the individual? And when we come back from the large group, because of time, I'm just going to ask folks to put in the chat, what's the main thing you got from this role play? What are some of the important things to do in terms of how you present yourself? What are some of the important things to ask the individual? So I am going to stop sharing for a second to be able to put you back in your breakout rooms, and you're going to go back to your same breakout rooms for about 10, 12 minutes just to discuss the scenario, how you would go about engaging that person, and what steps would you focus on with the individual. So we don't have time to report out, but I really want to thank you all for participating. And one last thing I want to talk about is self-care after crisis. Be sure to look at the self-care slide. On the final slide with resources, I have 3 videos about self-care after critical events or disasters. Be sure to access all the resources available to you through BHRS or through your university if you're an intern. Take breaks, take time off, engage in self-care activities. If you experience trauma symptoms after processing this kind of event, be sure to talk to your supervisor and to HR. If you're an employee, you have the right to workers' compensation resources. If you're a student, your situation is slightly different, but talk to your university and talk to university psychological services. You do have access to care, you do have access, and you do have rights, and I want you to be sure that you're aware of those rights, because this is a workplace injury, just as if you've fallen and broken your wrist at the workplace. So don't underestimate the effects of trauma on you. I hope everybody has a great week. Thanks for hanging in there. Next week, we're going to talk about distress tolerance and emotion regulation. So hope to see a lot of you then. Take care. Bye-bye.